Just 30 years ago, scientists thought that some places on Earth were sterile. Life there was thought to be simply impossible, as it seemed to be absent from other planets.
The temperature can sometimes be minus 20 degrees in winter, and it gets up to plus 5, so there are huge variations.
And what's even more interesting is that philosophically here, we're at the limit of life. That is to say, life or death.
However, some creatures, known as extremophiles, manage to develop in environments which are extremely hostile for most living creatures. In cold environments, microorganisms are the kings. They form the basis of fragile ecosystems, which are menaced by global warming. These creatures possess astonishing equipment, which allows them to survive in these hostile environments. Their adaptations are of particular interest to scientists. We're going to follow their trail to the coldest places on Earth, to Spitsbergen, Greenland, and Antarctica. Spitsbergen is an island in the archipelago of Svalbard in the Arctic Circle. It's an extreme environment because of freezing temperatures that can drop as far as minus 30 degrees. There are but 2 seasons, 9 months of long, dark and glacial winter, followed by 3 months of short, sunny and cool summer. The Spitsbergen scientific expedition has the mission of cataloguing the microfauna and flora during that short summer period. The expedition is made up of biology students, accompanied by their teacher, Jean-Michel Bichin, researcher at the Museum of Natural History in Paris.
According to him, that's the best place, and we can land easily with the Zodiac as well.
All the team will spend a month on the island, relying only on themselves.
We have to see if there's a stream, so that we can have water during our stay. If we can find a dry spot that's a little elevated, that'll give us an observation point. Beside the mountain wouldn't be bad to shelter us from the valley winds, as well as to see any visit from a bear.
Cataloguing the biodiversity of Spitsbergen means confronting 3 extreme environments: glaciers, steep cliffs, and tundra. To this rather unwelcoming picture is added the presence of polar bears. These lords of the ice are often presented as the principal victims of global warming. But along with the polar bear, thousands of species are menaced with extinction, and some haven't even been catalogued yet.
We know that global warming is going so fast that the Arctic ecosystems are in immediate danger, which means we consider they will survive between 25 and 50 years. So that's the context we're in as an Arctic biodiversity expedition. We're responding to a really urgent need, that of knowing more about the endangered ecosystems.
During the brief summer season on Spitsbergen, the sun never sets and shines all day. It's the ideal period to study the vegetation, which is in full growth. Come on, off we go. On its first day, the expedition will attack the great flat areas close to sea level where the tundra develops. This vegetation hugs the ground and is perfectly adapted to the Arctic environment. Even though the surface layer of soil melts during the summer, it is poor in mineral salts. This limits growth rates and density of the vegetation considerably.
As soon as there's a shelter where seeds can build up, where sediment grows, vegetation finds a place immediately. There you've typically got a pretty clump of dryas settling in. Once the plants have rooted down there, they'll try to colonize around them. You see it here, for example. So, roughly speaking, the aim is to hang on and then gain centimeters here and there.
So how did these plants manage to colonize cold and completely barren terrain? They take the form of a compact cushion which allows them to store heat. It's an efficient means of conquering terrain because certain plants can live for more than 100 years.
There are two explanations for that. It offers good wind resistance, but this compact form also protects from the cold, and beside that, the plants will die and thus create their own humus, their own organic matter for those plants that come after. So in fact, they create surface soil made up by the generations of plants which die in that place.
These cushions of vegetation thus serve as compost for other plants, such as Pedicularis hirsuta, the hairy lousewort. This plant, which is perfectly acclimatized, makes a sort of duvet to protect it from the cold. Its hairs are wrapped so tightly that they imprison air and act as thermal insulation. They also block harmful rays from the sun. What is more astonishing is that the densest and most developed vegetation is to be found in an even more extreme environment, on the sharp slopes of cliffs.
Hey, look there. You see, just there, you've got areas of rock slides, and between the rock slides, at the foot of the pillars there, you've really got an area with green platforms. I think we should take a look over there. We're going to climb it there on the flank. We don't really know what type of terrain we'll meet. It's probably unstable ground. There are really some highly eroded places. As in every biodiversity study, reaching the ecosystems isn't an easy task for some of them. That's also the reward, taking a certain number of risks to get to places that sometimes no one has ever observed. Such as this zone here, which is an extreme zone within an extreme place. Well, that's unexpected. Really unexpected. We've got plants with fruits and flowers.
But how do the plants find organic material in such an inhospitable environment?
The fact of finding plants at a more advanced stage in this environment, suspended from the cliff flank, 100 meters up, is really very surprising. At the same time, it's not really a mystery. We're just below a bird colony, so crudely put, here the food falls from the sky. Here there is guano, brought by the birds, which brings nitrogen, a nutritive material, which allows a whole lot of bacteria, mosses and lichens to colonize this site.
To completely catalogue the microfauna of Spitzberg, it will be necessary to approach these migratory birds who carry many parasites. Notably ticks, who travel well attached to the feathers of their hosts. They come from very far away, sometimes from hot countries, to conquer Spitzberg. a voyage sometimes made at the expense of the bird. As the ticks drink the bird's blood, they also give them Lyme's disease.
Ah, look, an Arctic seagull. This body isn't very old and probably comes from the big colonies you can see at the top of the cliff. So there's no other way of observing them close up except by the bodies which are found at the base of the cliff. On some of these birds, you can see, that's what I'm trying to do, whether there are parasites. Here in this is a real thermal blanket for acarians. Not only is there no chance of falling off, it's also very warm.
But the soft warmth of this blanket isn't enough to survive such a long voyage. Some ticks have developed exceptional resistance to variations in temperature. They can go from 40 to minus 30 degrees without any difficulty. How can the tick resist polar temperatures without its blood freezing? By producing an antifreeze, glycerol. Thanks to that, their cells only start to freeze beyond minus 20 degrees. So it's not surprising to find ticks in the most inhospitable places on the Earth. Beyond these cliffs, another extreme environment shelters life. These altitude lakes are on the high plains of Spitzberg. Their water freezes during most of the year, a hostile environment for living creatures.
And here we have a little stream which comes from the valley behind. Several smaller streams merge downstream, and there's quite a bit of vegetation on the banks. So it should be quite a good place. I hope to find crustaceans, small crustaceans. They're very hard to see. In any case, there'll be microfauna as usual. You see, we're not badly off here. This is a very fine mesh, 100 micrometers. That's 1/10 of a millimeter, and we'll get organisms of that size.
First of all, the net will filter the micro-algae, which abound in this cold water. They're the basis of the food chain. In a way, they act as a fuel for gelatinous organisms. These organisms ingest the microalgae and they get energy from them. In return, the microalgae are protected from the ice by the cellular membrane of their host, which is perfectly adapted to the cold.
We're mostly looking at little creatures here, that is, invertebrates that live in mosses, in soil, in bedding, and beneath stones. We're looking for what is both the hidden part and the largest part of biodiversity. That which modifies soils, that which is the basis of food chains, the workers of ecosystems.
Daphnia are a good example. Daphnia are little crustaceans which feed primarily on microalgae. They can filter thousands in an hour. They have a vital role since by removing the algae, they stop them from asphyxiating the environment. The sun's rays, so rare on Spitzberg, therefore can penetrate the depths of the lake more easily and help other organisms to develop, such as the copepod. When conditions deteriorate and the lake freezes, Daphnia and copepod produce eggs which are more solid than usual so as to assure their survival. The membrane of these eggs is capable of standing up to pressure, salt, or ice. The eggs detach themselves from the mother's body to fall to the bottom of the lake and await more favorable conditions before hatching.
Ah, a copepod. So there's one, super sample. These are the first crustaceans that I've seen in the Svalbard, at any rate in the field, and that's really marvellous. Look, there's another one. Great. The species that we can qualify as extremophile are completely dependent on the conditions that rule here, on the ice that protects them during winter from extreme temperatures and conditions, and the water available in summer, which allows life to develop. This means that the slightest change, and I'm talking here about global changes such as global warming, will have to bring on the complete disruption of these ecosystems with the disappearance of species which are completely adapted to these extreme conditions.
Global warming also has an effect on the terrain. Over 40 years, the Spitzberg glaciers have retreated many kilometers. For the expedition, the approach to these glaciers is even more painful and difficult because the ground is cracked and eroded by the meltwater. The ice front is a place that is very poor in organic material, and it takes a watchful eye to find organisms adapted to such extreme conditions.
We lift the stones along the neve. The temperature is a bit more than 0, but there I can see little springtails jumping. There's a tiny fauna developing inside here.
Springtails are one of the rare organisms capable of surviving in such conditions.
They're right at the start of the ecosystem, but these are very short ecosystems. In all extreme environments, ecosystems are reduced. Here, it isn't plants which directly supply organic material, at least locally. The organic matter has certainly been brought here by the wind or the glacier's movements, or perhaps by bacteria, which can produce organic matter from minerals.
So the springtails seek their food at the foot of the glaciers, in mud and under stones. To find their way in such an opaque universe, they have a long pair of antennae. Their body is covered with hooked hairs, which allow them to imprison air and which gives them an oxygen reserve whilst immersed in mud. The snow is scarcely an obstacle to them. Springtails secrete an antifreeze protein, which inhibits the formation of ice crystals up to a temperature of -6 degrees.
These little creatures will benefit by consuming, and will perhaps be consumed by one or two other species. We saw spiders a little lower, so there could also be spiders at this altitude. I don't know.
To escape their predators, the springtails have a secret weapon. A jumping spring is found beneath their abdomen. When it lets go, it allows them to jump instantly more than 10 centimeters, which is on our scale equivalent to jumping over the Eiffel Tower.
It might be less difficult for them to be in this area of the glacier because temperatures vary less during the year. Extreme conditions aren't caused just by cold, but by temperature variations. Here it's cushioned, so to speak, so even if it seems very cold for fauna, it's less difficult to go from -12 to +1 than from -12 to +15.
In cold environments, does life stop at the foot of the glacier? To find out, we're going on the ice shelf of Greenland, the Inlandsys. It's one of the most extreme places on Earth. The cold is constant and there is no vegetation. The Inlandsys formed 250,000 years ago. It's 3 times bigger than France and as much as 3,000 meters thick. It's an immense ice desert which contains by itself 10% of all the fresh water on Earth. Accompanied by his assistant, Catherine Perrott, Professor Alain Coutet from the Museum of Natural History of Paris is here to study organisms capable of developing in this icy hell. To complete his mission, he is supported by a team of glacionauts, specialists in the exploration of subglacial caves. During 10 days, the members of the expedition will be completely on their own. In such an extreme environment, climatic conditions change rapidly. For protection, the laboratory has to be set up before nightfall.
Listen, nothing's broken. There's a light. That's great.
And well, everything's ready for work. But what a slog. It's hellish work to bring all that, a real exploit. But in order to study the extremophiles in their environment, this has to be done. With the snow, the rain and the humidity, it's awful. But to get living organisms and study them properly, you have to.
The team takes advantage of the first night on the ice to rest and enjoy a thrilling display of the aurora borealis. At the break of day, Alain Coutet and Catherine Perrott go in hunt of organisms which have managed to establish themselves in this hostile place. But first you have to know where to look.
Ah yes, look, a very nice cryoconite hole. It was always thought that on glaciers there was no life, and well, finally that's not true. There's life everywhere. However, it's in these tiny little holes, and the organisms that live here are microscopic. These holes are called cryoconite holes. That means cryo dust and conite cold.
These holes, which are in fact found all over the ice sheet, appear astonishingly cylindrical. But how can nature fashion such perfect shapes?
Cryoconite holes have been a mystery for years. Now we understand their creation better. In fact, they're caused by mineral and organic particles brought by the winds. These particles fall on the ice, and when the sun shines, they heat more quickly than the ice. They melt the ice around, and some will spin around on the ice, making a little cylindrical hole in the ice. They finish up by falling to the bottom, which is what makes that brown matter we can see in the bottom of all the holes.
These holes are in fact a true, if unstable, micro-ecosystem. They can evaporate beneath the sun or freeze at any moment of the day. In this precarious environment, somehow life has managed to develop.
And this substance, which we're bringing up with a syringe, is made up of microorganisms. We recover what we've sampled, and then the only way of seeing if there is in fact life is to look at it under the microscope.
Isolating organisms so small and in such a compact environment as the cryoconite is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It requires tools that are no bigger than a strand of hair. In the microscopic world, a single drop of water can contain a whole food chain. The cryoconites are made essentially of thousands of minerals and micro-algae. These algae are the main producers of energy in this micro-ecosystem. By using photosynthesis, thanks to the sun, they make organic matter. This organic material is the favorite meal of rotifers. These strange creatures owe their name to two crowns of lashes which encircle their head and act like a wheel. They spin in opposing directions to bring nutritious particles to their mouths.
There aren't many predators here. There are the rotifers and the tardigrade. The tardigrade is the lord of nature here, the top of the food chain. Beyond that, there's nothing else living in this ecosystem.
The tardigrade, the super predator that rules here on the Greenland Ice Sheet, doesn't measure more than a millimeter.
There are so many cryoconites. There are lots of dark masses. You have to try to find this creature which is transparent, sometimes with a small brown mark, and sometimes it doesn't move, so you really must be vigilant and look at each little part of the preparation.
Tardigrades are amongst the smallest multi-celled creatures. They're also known as water bears because of their strange way of moving. They don't swim, but use their impressive claws to hold onto fragments of vegetation, which gives them a shambling appearance. We find them everywhere on Earth, from the summits of the Himalayas to the depths of the ocean, and that's certainly because of their astonishing capacity to resist extreme temperatures.
It's a creature which can resist the cold by sleeping in the same way as a bear and waking when conditions become favorable once more. When a cryoconite hole freezes, it will be caught in the ice, and that won't kill it. When the ice melts, it wakes, and we think that that capacity to preserve its life is due to a substance, a sugar called trehalose, and we think it gets that sugar from the microscopic algae which can make it.
This sugar is diffused in the creature's body and acts like an antifreeze. It also protects the membranes of its cells against the attacks of the cold. Alain Coutet wants to observe in the field an even more astonishing adaptation of the tardigrade.
There doesn't look bad. Can you see the different layers of colors? And there are drain-offs. We can sample in that area there, but we have to find an easy place.
Well, listen, I think we should go a bit higher. No problem to do that. There's a good face. That should be perfect for it.
One of our objectives is to descend into these shafts to gain access to very old ice. You see, the ice is created by snow accumulation. Every year, 25 meters of snow compacts, makes layers and traps creatures and algae which are at the surface. By descending to the depths, we arrive at centuries which are distant from us, 4 centuries, 5 centuries, 6 centuries. In some layers, we may be able to bring tardigrades which are 5 centuries old out of the ice and see if they are capable of coming back to life. That's an experiment we can't make in the laboratory. There's a place where organisms have been trapped, and you can see elsewhere things trickling. We'll have a thorough look, take away the superficial part and recover the trapped organisms if possible.
These images, obtained by an electronic microscope, are exceptional. They show the astonishing capacity for adaptation of the tardigrade. When it is trapped in the ice, the tardigrade can put its vital functions on hold. The creature expels all the water from its body. It shrivels and limits its activity to the strict minimum. It can stay in this state for hundreds of years until conditions are once again favorable. Ice moulins are the only means of access to tardigrades trapped in ice that is over 5 centuries old. These impressive caverns, which can be over 100 meters deep, are carved by meltwater. When the temperature drops, the water freezes and the walls harden. The ice cave then becomes accessible. Glacianaut Serge Aviot has already descended to 173 meters below the surface in one of these shafts. He holds the world record. When the temperature increases again, water streams down the sides of the shaft and they become unusable. That's why Sir Javiot watches the situation all the time. His descent to retrieve an ice core that is many centuries old is a real voyage in time.
What's
the point of understanding this capacity of resisting death? It's a philosophical problem to start with because we're between life and death. If we can understand how the tardigrade resists these conditions of dehydration and apparent death, we could be able to apply it to man. It's a kind of dream. It would require analogous conditions, substances which could be injected, etc. What could keep us alive in face of extreme conditions? Of course, it's a bit of a dream, but it's the kind of things you have to study because it's a purely scientific question all the same.
But let's go back to the surface. It's not unusual to see strange red streaks on the ice sheet. These marks are another opportunity for Alain Coutet to study extremophile organisms.
So there you see, Kathy, the red matter that we have here. It looks like a blood trail, quite typical. These are microscopic algae which are adapted to the cold.
How can these algae develop in direct contact with the ice?
So you can see these red balls we have here. They're actually green algae. It's surprising. They're red and usually they're green. The reality is that they make a substance to protect them from extreme conditions. This substance is red and gives them the appearance of a red globule. That is to say, they have inside their cells a coloured layer which isn't used for photosynthesis but protects them from excess sunlight and at the same time from the cold, antifreeze and sun umbrella. The algae that we find here aren't the same that we find on the ice pack for a simple reason. The ice pack is frozen seawater. Here, it's fresh water. Diving under the ice pack, we can find reservoirs of extraordinary microscopic algae which colour the ice pack underneath in shades of yellow and green, etc., which is quite astonishing.
On the other side of the planet, in Antarctica, the food chain starts beneath the ice pack. Extremophile algae act as a food source for krill. This is the most abundant group of creatures on Earth. In summer, this kind of shrimp gathers in vast groups, which can cover a surface of 500 square kilometers and weigh 2 million tons. Krill is an essential energy source for most of the species living in the frozen waters of Antarctica.
We're going down to 125 meters, 125.
The ICOTA scientific mission is studying this food chain in the cold waters of the Antarctic.
It's fine, we're going to 200 meters.
It is directed by Philippe Kuby, professor of the Villefranche-sur-Mer Oceanographic Laboratory. If there are so many krill, it's because of the extraordinary proliferation of cold water vegetal plankton.
Well, there, it's really dense in phytoplankton. It's a real soup. To have a rich supply of plankton, several conditions have to be met. Firstly, things have to favour the development of phytoplankton, i.e. vegetal plankton. As for plants, there has to be light, and there's a lot of light in this summer period around the poles. Next, nutritive salts are needed, and these salts tend to be more concentrated towards the depths. To bring them up to the surface, it requires either storms or upward movement of cold water, and these conditions are met frequently on the Antarctic continental shelf.
Plankton is made up of hundreds of plant and animal species. It is already in itself a true food chain, perfectly adapted to the cold. At the base of the chain are the diatoms, micro-algae which appeared on Earth 150 million years ago. In vast numbers, they create more than half of the oxygen which we breathe. Diatom are consumed by foraminifera. These organisms use their filaments to catch their food and to move. Diatom and foraminifera are very simple, made up by a single cell and by a shell. These microscopic shells made of silicon or calcium are true architectural masterpieces. To ensure the best rigidity for their shell, these organisms invented, well before we did, corrugated roofs, cellular fiberboard, and honeycomb structures. Diatom and foraminifera are food in turn for animal plankton. This is essentially made up of crustaceans, jellyfish, and krill. This zooplankton feeds in its turn a strange extremophile fauna which lives below the ice pack. But how do these organisms survive in water that is at -2 degrees?
Adaptation to the cold in a polar environment is made in two fashions. The first possibility is to increase the internal salt quantity. So adding salt to the body means that where the freezing point is becomes a lot better for these creatures. The other possibility is to add tiny organic molecules like sugar or glucose, for example, or other tiny molecules which equally mean that the creature needn't fear freezing at 0 degrees.
It's the icefish that push adaptive measures the furthest. Philippe Cuby goes to the French research station d'Urmont-d'Urville to use the ROV, a radio-controlled submarine robot capable of diving to more than 100 meters depth, which is where the champion of survival in cold water lives.
There, the ROV is at 174 meters, and in relation to classical fishing, what's good with the ROV is that one can observe the individuals in their environment, explain how its habitat works, and also study its behavior, something which is very, very difficult, in fact impossible to do by fishing. And here we see the typical behavior of these fish. They're fish which tend to wait on the bottom. And there, see, it's a little disturbed, so it moves. And they're on the lookout.
To expend as little energy as possible in the cold waters, the fish sits in currents rich in plankton and only has to wait with its mouth wide open. Thus, the icefish constantly filters the oxygen found in the water because it's the only invertebrate on Earth that doesn't have any hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the pigment which tints our blood red. It carries oxygen through the body. The blood of the icefish has none, which is why their blood is white or transparent. It takes the oxygen it needs directly from the water.
We're in a very cold environment, where there is a lot of oxygen, and these fish have gills with a very large surface, so the exchange is better. Their heart is a lot bigger, which improves blood circulation, and oxygen arrives directly in their tissues. This modification probably is only found in cold environments, and probably couldn't happen in other environments.
But at these polar temperatures, the main problem of the icefish and most other fish is avoiding being frozen on the spot. They live in such a cold environment that the water entering their mouths can freeze a part of their digestive system. Luckily for them, they produce a protein which acts on frozen tissue and stops the ice from spreading. But it's Philippe Kubi and his team that risk freezing if they don't return quickly to base because a glacial wind is rising. Katabatic winds are the most violent Antarctic winds, with peaks at 300 kilometers per hour. They slide on the glaciers and accelerate with the cold. On the islands of the far south, a fly has learnt how to resist these winds and this cold. The fly also has anti-freezing sugars to survive these hostile conditions, but the most remarkable adaptation is the loss of its wings. In such an extreme environment, predators are rare, and the need to fly to escape them is no longer a priority. Moreover, this loss offers two big advantages: less surface for the wind to catch and fat reserves which have taken the place of flight muscles. Stocking an energy reserve is the key to survival in the Antarctic for many species, and in particular for the Adelie penguin. This emblematic Antarctic bird is also a model of adaptation. The Adelie penguin and the emperor penguin are in fact the only species to have colonized the lowest latitudes of Earth. On the Dumont d'Urville base, a research program on its capacities to manage energy is completely dedicated to the penguins. It's directed by Mireille Racoeur, CNRS biologist.
The Biomar laboratory was constructed because of the proximity of this colony, which is quite spread out. This allows us to follow a colony, always the same one, because in 80% of cases, the male, which returns the first, is faithful to its nest. So it will return to the same nest and, in theory, find the same female there.
The reproductive period is the ideal moment to study the energy-managing capacities of the penguins. They stock large quantities of fat in order to be able to feed their offspring. So mind you put the cover in place for the chicks. The male has to stay close to the nest all the time to bring warmth and protect the chicks. When a penguin is trapped for analysis, it is therefore vital to isolate the chicks from the attacks of the skuas.
These creatures, alternating between periods of fast and periods of heavy feeding, are capable of becoming almost obese. When they get to the month of October, they're all round. Then they can embark on a period where they fast for 30 days, of at least 20 days for the male if he's hatching the eggs. So they're always on the razor's edge from a point of view of their nutritive budget. And that's what's important. That means that they know how to manage their energy reserve, their period of fast, their period of overfeeding, in an extremely fine way in order to survive.
Mireille Racoeur has to take tissue samples to completely understand these energy management mechanisms.
We're taking away a few feathers at the site of the incision so that it's as clean as possible because the feathers are really full of infections.
But the feathers are also the best weapon of the penguin to fight against the cold. The penguin has a very dense plumage, 17 feathers per square centimetre. Furthermore, these feathers cover a thick down. Its thermal insulation is almost perfect and allows it to spend long hours in frozen water looking for its food. What is it that allows the penguin to spend so much energy in such a glacial environment? To understand this phenomenon, Mireille Ricoeur takes samples of the fatty tissues of the penguin.
We'll conserve about 200 milligrams of tissue in this liquid nitrogen. Liquid nitrogen is one of the best preserving agents for studying the expression of different genes which are implicated in adipogenesis or in explaining their storage capacity.
The penguin comes out of this experience unharmed. It immediately returns to its chicks that await their food with impatience. Young penguins have extremely rapid growth, which requires as much energy as they use to combat the cold.
At 15 days, about when they're 15 days old, they're not under the incubation pouch anymore. So it's at that moment that they absolutely must put all their thermogenic processes in place, all the metabolic processes which will allow them to stand up to the cold.
These mechanisms, which Mireille Ricoeur calls thermogenic, concern all the processes which allow the penguins to raise their body heat to fight against the cold. When the temperature drops below -20 degrees, the penguin's response is astonishing. It doesn't shiver and it doesn't run to get warm. On the contrary, it becomes immobile. This is because its internal organism is then completely taken up with these processes of fighting against the cold.
These thermogenic processes are situated on the cellular level, or really subcellular, in the little units which are called mitochondria. Mitochondria are often compared to reactors because they provide the energy which is indispensable for the different vital functions of the organism. These mitochondria are capable of uncoupling like a motor which doesn't work well. When it's out of order, the vehicle goes slower and the motor heats up because it's not regulated. Well, mitochondria are a bit similar. So they use energy reserves to produce energy, and when it's unregulated, it produces a little less energy for vital functions and starts producing heat.
The penguin is therefore perfectly adapted to confront the great cold of the Antarctic. But in the context of global warming, these glacial periods are less and less common. When it becomes warm, all these adaptations become handicaps. To ventilate, the penguin lifts its wings and opens its beak wide.
They're practically in a homeothermic state. That is to say, they no longer produce heat because it's very warm. They're in the sun and they're even suffering from the heat because, as you see, they've got their beaks open, they're in polypnea, and so are their chicks. So we can imagine that these creatures, that are very well adapted to the cold, will really suffer from climactic warming.
The penguins can always dive into the frozen water to freshen up while feeding, but climatic warming also menaces most of the species they feed upon.
So whatever kind of fish or organism we're observing, many of these organisms are what is called stenothermal, a term which means that the capacity of the species to adapt in relation to the maximum and minimum temperature can never be more than that of a difference of 4 to 6 degrees. It is well known from physiological studies and studies in biochemistry that a slight increase of temperature can have catastrophic effects on certain species, notably these species here.
The scientific community is in agreement on global planetary warming, and this warming is even more marked at the poles. We know that 1 degree of warming all over the planet means 2 degrees increase at the poles. And that means, concretely, massive and major changes in living conditions for these organisms. That will then mean that these extremophiles, which are particularly adapted to their native conditions, so to say, will be particularly and directly endangered. And these are probably the first organisms on Earth which will heavily suffer from current climate changes.
It took millions of years for these microorganisms to adapt and conquer these freezing environments. It will take perhaps less than 50 years for the greater part of them to become extinct, and with them, entire ecosystems will vanish.